Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and welcome to a weekly reset special report. You'll notice that there was not the usual reset over the weekend because you'll have noticed I look like absolute shit and can barely talk. But the last couple of days have seen such an influx of news that we had no choice but to put this special midweek edition together, because when I say news internet, I don't mean like, oh, they changed how flying unlocks on the 9.2 PTR, although they did. It's now completely unconnected to the cipher of the first ones. No, sorry, that's not the news. No, this news is on a monumental change the game forever scale. And I'm not even talking about Blizzard's banning boosting communities, although they did. And overnight, trade chat was completely cleared of the chatter of 1,000 cross-server spam bots so that you can enjoy all of the anal jokes and racial slurs in peace. No, this news is of course that cross-faction play has been promised this expansion, as in one of the things people will now remember Shadowlands for will be as the expansion when Horde and Alliance characters were able to raid, dungeon, and PvP together in the same parties for the first time, which is... well, it's kind of mind-blowing, to be honest. And we are going to look at all the details surrounding it in this special report. But here's the thing. I wouldn't even bet against that not being the end of the big announcements this week, which is why, yeah, I'm rushing to get this script done, but I'm not rushing too much because, you know, basically what I'm saying is don't be surprised if we suddenly cut to a future me in like a different shirt and not quite matching lighting setup to tell you about, I don't know, a 9.2 release date or something, that's all. But cross-faction play, long a dream of modern World of Warcraft players and long predicted by World of Warcraft players too, especially since Battle for Azeroth, the factions are seriously in like the worst faction war ever, but also we realise war is bad and we'll have to stand together to beat first Sylvanas and second some really unimportant final boss who I can't even remember the name of now because it's not important. Just chuck them in at the end. Expansion really did seem to be gearing up for a seismic change in the way that factions were approached from a story and game mechanics perspective. We, along with just about every other creator I can think of, predicted that there was going to be a shake-up at the end of that expansion, with ideas ranging from a whole new third faction to, at the very least, a loosening of restrictions on what races had to belong to which faction. In the end, that never happened, of course, although Ion Hazzikostas has mentioned in magazine interviews that were published alongside this news that the team don't feel the need to create any specific story events in Shadowlands to explain the sudden faction love-in, as that story was already told in BFA. So, like, yeah, totally should have been done in BFA. I will never not regret that they didn't do it in BFA, but it's here now. That's the main thing. And what is it exactly? Well, starting in patch 9.25, this announcement is also the first official confirmation that we've had of patch 9.25, by the way. My hopes for the Trial of Sylvanas story patch are, I know, doomed to end in miserable disappointment, but I'm going to hold desperately, bitterly onto them until the desperate bitter end. Horde and Alliance characters will be able to team up for instanced content in the form of raids, dungeons, including Mythic Plus, and PvP, including rated PvP, and with all the usual party chat and loot trading rules functioning as normal. Groups can either be formed through Battle.net friends, in-game cross-faction communities, or through the pre-made group finder, where the group leader in each case will be able to designate whether a group is cross-faction or not. This whole truce is purely opt-in. If you are a hardcore dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist, then you currently don't have to engage with the new system if you don't choose to. It's worth noting that this chumminess only applies in the instance itself, not outside. So if you are, by the summoning stone, waiting to enter the instance, then characters from the opposing faction who are in your raid group will be shown as hostile, and if you are both in war mode, then you can kill each other. But otherwise, we are looking at a brave new era of Horde and Alliance cooperation. And in case the magnitude of this hasn't hit you yet, there is now a very real chance that if you join a Cypher of the First One's normal run must-have curve Whisper for Invite group without properly checking, then once you phase in, you can quite feasibly find yourself in a raid group consisting entirely of pandas, worgen, and vulpera. That's a thing that could happen. And this is clearly incredibly good news, right? I mean, not about the furry group, but about everything else, right? And I know what you're thinking. You expect me to say, no, it was a shit show, and show you some over-the-top negative comments here for the lols. And of course, there are people who don't love the idea for RP reasons or emotional reasons, and honestly, that's a position which I can understand. I think most people will have an emotional reaction to this alongside the practical gameplay considerations, which will vary wildly from player to player. Some people just really like being on a team. Some people are deeply invested in their hatred of the other faction, which I've never considered especially healthy, really, but okay. And I think the opt-in element of this change is an important one. This is something, after all, that is supposed to give players more choice, and so they should have the choice not to engage with it. That's cool. The faction conflict is important in WoW. When the game first released, you couldn't create a Horde and Alliance character on the same server. But to my mind, this isn't removing that conflict so much as adding an in-game representation for players as to how the Alliance and Horde constantly do team up to get the job done in the narrative. There's not been a single expansion where the Horde and Alliance ended up fighting different big bads. They always have a common foe. And this just gives players the chance to better live that fantasy in-game rather than neutering the obvious animosity that exists in the game. Like I say, you can spend all day queuing for a tank, finally get one from the opposing faction, summon them, and then gank them if you really want. That is a thing you can do. There are others that consider this the last throes of a dying game, desperate to gain back subs like a drowning man gasping for breaths. A sign that the end times truly are near, like your favorite artist excitedly tweeting about their new NFT collection. And that could very well be true. I don't know. If it is the end times, I will be sad because I quite like WoW. It's a video game that I enjoy playing. But in the meantime, this is a cool thing in the video game that I enjoy playing, so it's hard to be too upset by it. And the community overwhelmingly supports cross-faction play, and indeed would like it to go even further. Two things conspicuously absent from this system is cross-faction guilds and open-world grouping. Whereas this is clearly just a first iteration, testing on the PTR soon once 9.2 goes live, it's easy to imagine how it might be expanded into either or both of these things next expansion or later. And I don't know, I feel quite differently about the idea of both of these things being made cross-faction, honestly. Now, guilds, absolute baller plan. At the moment, half my guild are incredibly excited about being able to bring Horde characters along to our Alliance raid nights. Because of course they are, because there is no party that can't be made better by having all of the elves in it. But since those Horde characters won't be members of our guild, what does that do to tracking our guild progress? I'm all for all of the elves, you know I am, but if this is going to jeopardize our chances in the race to world first for guilds with a name a bit like Immortalis, then honestly, is it really worth it? Slightly further down the ladder, if Max is right and half of Limit are going to instantly switch to Alliance when this change goes live, well, you need at least 16 guild members in your Mythic group to qualify for guild achievements. So Limit could win the race to world first as a group, but not even get region or server first achievements in-game. And I think the feeling among most people is that at this stage, not having cross-faction guilds only really serves to introduce some niggly weird problems like that, which it seems pointless having. Another thing is, it's funny because a lot of people are commentating how wild it is that cross-faction play really feels like a box feature for a new expansion. And if we are getting this now in Shadowlands, what have they got planned for 10.0? And really it makes me think about how allied races and old world scaling were both BFA features that initially went live in the final patch of Legion. I suspect this is probably quite similar. Basically, I think cross-faction play is a 10.0 feature, and it's hugely likely that cross-faction guilds might be one of the further iterations that they enable when the new expansion hits. And hey, if all those new mixed up split-up guilds that can't enter each other's capital cities need a place to hang out together? Well, wouldn't that be the perfect time to announce cool new customizable guild halls as well?
Copium alert! Copium alert!
Shut up, that's not copium, that's just blind idiotic optimism, okay? But yeah, ironically, I think just cross-faction dungeons, raids, and PvP actually have less weird niggles if you also have cross-faction guilds rather than not. But the same definitely can't be said for cross-faction teamwork in the open world. This doesn't apply to every open world scenario. Cross-faction groups for world bosses? Awesome. But questing together? Honestly, even if they could make it work with the gabillions of lines of code that they'd have to check in the 17 years worth of game that makes an assumption about your character based on your faction, like for example, in most cases, whether the quest giver will try to attack you or not, little things like that, I'm still not sure I'd even want it then. Because at the end of the day, I really like having some differences between Horde and Alliance. And questing experiences are one of the primary places the most imaginative of those changes tend to happen. In my opinion, it would be a shame to lose Horde and Alliance quest givers occasionally sending you in different directions to different stories and events. It's something I've missed in Shadowlands from BFA and Legion and every other expansion before it. And whereas being able to play together is an unqualified 100% no drawback total class A 9-carat win for me, I'd still love to be able to maintain that uniqueness in the narrative that the two factions have traditionally maintained. There's a really great line in Ian's announcement post on Battle.net. Oh, by the way, you can see me live reading and reacting to this and all of the other news on our T&E TV channel, which has been growing very nicely. Thank you very much. But it says that they used to consider Horde and Alliance separation a pillar of what makes Warcraft Warcraft. But on reflection, that's an oversimplification. Alliance and Horde identity is what is fundamental to Warcraft. And I think that's such an eloquent way of putting it. You can, and in my opinion should, remove the separation, but without removing the identity of the factions. So this is great, and just about everyone is happy about it, at least until the game breaks completely on the day that 9.25 launches, obviously. And as much as I hate to be too enthusiastic about anything, because when I do, the cool kids come for me and tell me that I'm a shill, I think it's also good to note that this announcement comes on the back of a couple of weeks of really good other announcements and changes from Blizz. I can't be alone in thinking that the 9.2 PTR has been the best PTR that I can remember for dev communication and response to player feedback. We've had changes to flying and legendaries and tier tokens. Oh yeah, we're getting tier tokens now, but that's not the news. All direct from feedback from the PTR, and where popular changes haven't been made, we've seen some really thoughtful and in-depth blue posts. Like, for example, from the tier set team explaining why. Almost enough to make you think that those good changes in 9.15 weren't just a trick, and that Blizzard weren't just lying when they said that they'd taken stock a bit and decided to move on from some old ingrained ideas. Indeed, Ian repeats that sentiment again in the IGN interview about cross-faction play, where he says, "We've been revisiting things we've said no to that people in the community have asked for. We probably reached a tipping point a while ago, but in a game like this, we're stubborn traditionalists, and it's scary to say, let's uproot this foundational pillar of what the game has been for over a decade." As you can imagine, there are some voices online who are accusing Ian here of trying to pass the buck onto the old team. But I think that's obviously the opposite of what is being said here. He's quite clearly admitting that Team 2, under Ion Hazzikostas, have been too stubborn to bend to community feedback and desires, and I don't know, maybe 9.15 and 9.2 weren't a complete lie to our actual faces though, and maybe there generally is a change of philosophy going on behind the scenes.
Copium alert! Copium alert!
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't blame anyone for being skeptical, frankly, and I have my doubts too, especially as it's easy to get carried away with what we think this means may be possible in the future, like my dream of a WoW where all story and reputation gains are account-wide to the extent that all you really ever have to do with an alt is level them and gear them, or the fact that Ion Hazzikostas once looked me in the eye at Blizzard HQ and told me that player housing is something that they definitely want to make happen. So I have my doubts too, but in the last patch and the current PTR, and now with this cross-faction announcement, I think it's fair to give credit where it's due, and I think Blizzard have, for the most part, been walking the walk about their new philosophy, which can only be good. Well, I guess I'll publish this video then. I mean, I guess that's probably not any more news. might just wait a couple of seconds? No. Okay, cool. I just want to say thank you for all the support that we've been getting from you guys in 2022 so far. Whether you've been watching videos here on the main channel or over at TNE TV or our Twitch live streams, obviously especially so to all of our patrons who make all of our work possible, still after all this time. Our new baby is due this month at some point, so it's quite likely that one day we're both just going to disappear from content creation for a bit while Evitel, births an actual human from her body. So don't be alarmed when that happens. Keep an eye on our Twitter account if you want to stay updated. And yeah, it looks like there's no more news yet, so I guess I'll just bye.